Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone from Kuwait, from New Jersey, and from Georgia, and from Tel Aviv. I am Jonathan Barsaid, and I'm president of the America-Israel Friendship League. Thank you for joining us today. And once again, this is another webinar that we are bringing in our series of COVID-19 related webinar series. As we start, please do let us know in the chat where you are joining us from. And we always like to see those and share them with everyone else. And a reminder that we will be posting a recording of the session for your continued enjoyment and sharing with others. Also, if you have a question, please write those in the chats. Time permitting, we will be getting to those also to the panel to be addressed. During the last 20 years, we have heard much about the revolution impacted the world in the technology revolution, the information revolution. One such area that receives less public recognition is associated with the medical field, not necessarily medical technology, but rather that of cannabis, a plant for which we have known for centuries has been recognized with medical benefits, but because of other impact, it has been associated also with illegal mind-altering drugs for which trafficking has typically been highly regulated. Over the course of the last 20 years, we have witnessed a revolution in the approach towards cannabis and its acceptance as a physician-prescribed medicine with therapeutic benefits. I believe most of us know people who have been very seriously ill and who have actually attested to the benefits of medical use of cannabis. With us today are several experts who will shed light on this attitudinal change. Alex Conn, a botanist who brought knowledge and know-how from his education in the Far East to help consult the US Air Force, and over the course of the last 20 years, has worked with private industry on CBD extraction technologies. Dan Edelman, chief strategist at PharmoCann, a leading Israeli developer of cannabis-based medications, and Kellen O'Keefe, chief strategy officer at Flower One, the largest cannabis producer in Nevada. But before I start, I would like to invite Ambassador Dan Gillerman to provide a greeting. Ambassador Gillerman is the chairman of the America-Israel Friendship League and has served for many years as Israel's ambassador to the UN, two of which he was also vice president of the UN General Assembly. In addition to steering our Israeli office of the America-Israel Friendship League, Danny is also the chairman of the board of PharmoCann. Ambassador Gillerman.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our friends, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. These are trying and very challenging times for all of us in the US, in Israel, and around the world. And first, I would like to really express my hope that you are all healthy and safe. It is my honor and distinct pleasure as chairman of the board of the America-Israel Friendship League, as well as the chairman of the board of PharmoCann, Israel's foremost and most innovative medical cannabis companies, to introduce this very special webinar on the healing properties of this very exciting phenomena. I hope you enjoy the webinar, and I take this opportunity to wish you and your families a very happy new year, filled with joy, good health, success, and the love of family and friends. I think it won't be too much to ask that the new year, which will begin on this weekend, will at least be a normal year, without the excitement, without the challenges, and without the anxiety of the year that ends on Friday. So be well, stay safe, and Shana Tova to all of you and your families, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Danny. So as we start, what we would like each one of the panel members will be giving us a brief 5-minute presentation about this industry. Why don't we start with Alex?
Yes, thank you very much. And thanks for the excellent introduction to the ambassador. Briefly, and I'll try and cover this quickly to leave as much time for the other panelists and for questions. So briefly, the principal challenges that I see in this industry, both the cannabis industry and the non or less regulated CBD industry, is that the product has to be maintained at the standards which you'd maintain for a pharmaceutical drug and yet be cost effective. And that's a really big challenge. It is treated in a regulatory environment that's very fragmented around the world, and particularly in the United States. You know, as people know, it varies in the US from state to state on the cannabis side, and it's rather convoluted even on the non-cannabis, let's call it the hemp side. So you have to navigate those waters, but most importantly, you have to make sure the product's safe. And that's the big question. And it's a question that's not easily answered, and that's got a lot of difficult business challenges. So the only other product that's in commercial use today, and for decades or maybe even centuries, that we smoke, that we burn and inhale, is tobacco. So one of the things that we looked at in California, for example, is if we're going to regulate whether it's hemp, people do smoke hemp, they call it smokable hemp flower, or whether it's cannabis, marijuana, the question is, how do you make that safe to smoke? We can talk about edible things later on, and some of the other panelists probably have more information than I would on that. The problem is, if you say, well, we're just going to regulate it like tobacco, which is a drug in the United States regulated by the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, then you have to say, well, what does the tobacco industry use on their products, and how do they assure that, other than the harmful things in tobacco, nicotine and some tars and things like this, how do they actually make sure that tobacco is safe? And it turns out we don't know, because in the true fashion of the tobacco industry, they did their work very detailed, very in-depth studies a long time ago, and then they didn't share that information. So the first thing that the state of California did was to say, well, we can't really depend on the tobacco data because we can't get it from them. And they sort of grandfathered themselves in, and the FDA accepted that 30 years ago, whatever. And they spent hundreds of millions of dollars studying this, but unfortunately that data is not available. So then we have to sort of assume that we're going to find things that would be harmful to smoke, maybe even to eat, and we're going to say there's only acceptable limits of those. And then the second problem we encountered, and my colleagues in Oregon had already encountered this and gave us a lot of advance warning on what a problem this would be, is that the plant itself is like a magnet. If it finds something in the soil, it pulls it out of the soil. It's a wonderful chelator of toxins in the soil. If it finds something in the air, it pulls it out of the air. It's a wonderful thing to scrub air. The problem is that it keeps it in its leaves, in the flower, where the extracts of cannabis come from, or hemp come from. So it's soaking up all the poisons around, and then we're smoking this plant. So we have to set our thresholds very low for detection of these poisons. And that's what we attempted to do in the state of California. There was a lot of resistance to this, as you might expect, from the industry, who said that's impossible. We can't grow cannabis that's that clean. It's growing it indoors turns out to make it worse. And if you have things like we're having now, these wildfires on the West Coast, in California, extremely bad, all of the stuff that's being burnt in the air is now settling in the cannabis farms and the hemp farms and in the indoor grows, or even the greenhouses. It gets more concentrated. It's sort of opposite of what you think. So this is a major problem. I believe it needs to be addressed before the industry can fully mature. And there are some companies around the world that are trying to address these issues. So that's the first subject. The second subject, and I'll cover this in only, a minute or a minute and a half. The second subject is how do you introduce the product into the body? And it ranges in simple form like topicals, cosmetics, or salves or creams that you just apply it to your skin. And this all the way, the spectrum continues all the way to saying, well, we're going to introduce it. My favorite example is as a suppository, an anal suppository. And that is much closer to a pharmaceutical route of administration, obviously. Of course, there's oral administration and back to the inhaled smoked product. So burnt product, let's call it. So the routes of administration matter, and they matter just as they would with any plant. 40 years ago, something like that, Andrew Weil, who was one of the early philosophers about natural products, an MD, a very, very great man, still alive. He said, if you took a swimming pool of cocoa leaves from Peru, you could probably eat half the swimming pool. And it's not going to hurt you. Well, you couldn't eat it all. So, but you could eat like a kilo of these leaves and they won't hurt you. It's not going to affect you deleteriously. But if you extracted that swimming pool, which is what it takes to make a kilo of cocaine, you've concentrated things so far down that a little bit of cocaine can actually hurt you relative to the biomass, the leaves that were in the swimming pool. And that's a fundamental law of pharmacy, of pharmacology. The more you concentrate something down, the more it becomes complicated to use it safely. Might be more effective because it's concentrated, but you're also making the dosage and the potential error and the potential side effects greater. So what I like to refer people to is the University of California at Los Angeles, highly biased, of course, and that would be the Cannabis Research Initiative there. It's one of the major institutes doing research on this in the United States. There are several universities and several private sector initiatives and nonprofits also doing research that collaborate with the CRI, Cannabis Research Industry or Initiative at UCLA. And then, of course, some of the other excellent institutions around the United States and internationally. And Israel has been a leader in this. So I always refer people to look at the institutions that are doing the research and then pose your questions to them. They are very responsive. They're proud of their work. And of course, they always need your support. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'll stand back for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'll mute my phone.
Thank you very much. That's definitely been a great intro, basically, to sort of starting to understand some of the complexities that are involved and why it's not just something that is made prevalent and available to the public. Kellen, do you want to provide us some insight from Nevada?
Sure. Those are really great points, Alex, and thank you for sharing. And thank you everyone for having me. It's great to be here. With regards to how cannabis, there's so many points I could touch on there. With regards to how cannabis is regulated, Nevada is one of the states that does have rather stringent regulations and tests cannabis much, much stricter than, say, California and other states. We also, have a unique and different supply chain than other states do. As you're aware, California has a very deep history of outdoor and low-tech greenhouse cannabis that is a very significant part of the supply chain. Are we going to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, go ahead. Maybe you can provide us also some insight about PharmoCann, what PharmoCann is doing.
PharmoCann is, I'm sorry, not me. That's a.
I apologize. I meant Flower One. I apologize.
Oh, sure. Okay. Great. So Flower One is the largest cannabis producer in the state of Nevada. We have a 400,000 square foot high-tech greenhouse and 55,000 square foot production facility. I would love to show the video and then get to talk maybe after, because I feel like the video does such an incredible job that I don't think words can quite describe. But should we show that now, or should we show that later?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, this video hopefully does a good job of showing a little bit of who we are, and then I'm happy to jump back in and kind of give a full description. And of course, excited to answer anybody's questions about American cannabis, Nevada, COVID, and all the rest.
Just
I'm Thomas Rosengren. I'm the Director of Extraction and Production here at Flower One. Combining over 20 years of greenhouse operational excellence with best-in-class cannabis operators and the largest cannabis extraction and production facility in Nevada, Flower One is defining the future of cannabis, offering consistent, reliable, and scalable fulfillment to a growing number of industry-leading cannabis brands. Beyond the obvious focus of quality, consistency and producibility at scale is what truly sets us apart. Our ability to really work on maximizing margins and driving down costs, increasing efficiencies in production workflows, and minimizing waste are what are going to enable us to stay truly competitive in this burgeoning marketplace. All parts of the plant's life cycle are important to what we do here in production. Our cultivation team's focus on optimal drying and curing is absolutely crucial, as it can make or break even the best bud. Attached to Flower One's 400,000 square foot greenhouse, this 55,000 square foot production facility leverages all three styles of upstream extraction. Running in parallel, we can readily consume between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds of biomass each week. As a result, Flower One is uniquely poised to generate a diverse range of derivative products, including full-spectrum oils, high-quality distillates, cannabis-derived terpenes, and boutique concentrates, definitely enabling us to fulfill orders for a wide range of top-performing brands, offering vape pens, edibles, topicals, in addition to cutting-edge delivery formats. The realization of such a large-scale production capability has been a huge milestone for the team and demonstrates our ability to produce premium quality cannabis products for Nevada's leading cannabis brands, retailers, and consumers.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Jonathan. So at Flower One, as I was mentioning, we're the state of Nevada's largest cultivator and producer of cannabis products. We are a full-service brand fulfillment partner. So we do everything from seed to shelf, if you will. We have no retail interests, but we cultivate, extract, produce, and manufacture, and also distribute for a number of the America's leading cannabis brands. Our brand partners include some world famous brands such as Cookies, Kiva, Heavy Hitters, Lift Tickets, Old Pal. Our brand portfolio is among, I would say, the best in the entire industry. Again, our focus is very different from that of Israel and that of the medical research that's being done in legal cannabis markets. As I'm sure you guys are all aware, in America, we have a very distinct cannabis program, and our medical and adult use programs are very, very different from on a state-to-state basis. And again, due to the federally illegal nature of cannabis, we have had very limited research that's been able to be accomplished here in the United States. A lot of our focus has been on adult use cannabis and adult use cannabis brands. I am a big believer that both medical and adult use cannabis will have significant roles in the future. And I'm a big believer in the plant. I lost my father to pancreatic cancer in 2012, and cannabis played a very, very large role in the palliative care phase of my father's life. I'm a big believer in the therapeutic benefits of the plant. I've also seen enough anecdotal evidence personally to believe that there are significant healing properties associated with the plant. And I'm very excited to see the research continue as cannabis is legalized. As Alex mentioned, very proud of my friends at UCLA, Jeff Chen and the program there that was developed. But as you guys are all aware, that still has to operate based on donations, very privately, and very differently than I believe research will in the United States when cannabis is federally legalized. Countries like Israel have allowed for this research and taken a much different approach to cannabis for decades now. And that has resulted in a number of developments and partnerships that we're very excited to continue to explore here in the United States. As a brand fulfillment partner in Nevada, we are also open to and beginning to explore relationships with brands, or I should say more medically focused brands that offer a variety of the discoveries that have been made in Israel and other places, and therefore will bring those products to us in Nevada via licensing agreements or joint venture partnerships, where we can then offer those medicines to the state of Nevada and its customers.
Thank you. Thanks, Kellen. So finally, Dan, I mean, we've heard actually from both Alex and Kellen how Israel, there's a lot of research that's going on in Israel. Maybe you can shed some light about the research on your company.
Hi. I'll talk about some of the, I'll talk first about PharmoCann, and then I'll refer to the research points. My name is Dan Edelman. I'm a lawyer and a strategy officer in PharmoCann Ltd. PharmoCann, which is a publicly traded company since 2019, is a veteran medical cannabis company, probably one of the pioneers, administering medical cannabis to thousands of registered patients in Israel for more than 12 years. We administer buds, oils, and for many years also a medical ointment to more than 11,000 patients cumulatively through the years, about 3,500 annually. We focus more on quality than volume. We cultivate under IMC GAP quality standard, 3.5 tons of flower annually in our cultivation site in the Galilee region in northern Israel. We have 13 sort of elite strains that, and 100 more in our genetic bank. And at least 2 of our strains have been checked by the cannabis laboratory in the technical institution in Haifa, the Technion, which arguably is, if not the leading, one of the leading medical cannabis research institutes in the world. And 2 of our strains have been found to have added value over other strains in Israel and abroad regarding multiple sclerosis and sleeping disorder. We started also another to cultivate our strains in another site in the south of Israel. So we'll have another 3 tons annually. It'll add up to 6 tons of flowers per year. If I typify sort of the added value of PharmoCann and maybe the whole industry in Israel, it was sort of a conjuncture of circumstances. What happened was that Israel was probably one of the first countries in which medical cannabis has been regulated systematically. I mean, doctors have license and patients have license to purchase it. And obviously there's no recreation in Israel. And at the same time, that happened about 12, 13 years ago, for about 10 years, they companies like PharmoCann, which is one of the first companies in Israel, were allowed to function as one-stop shops, meaning we did everything. We have the nursery, we cultivated, we produced, and maybe most importantly, we distributed to the patients. And what that did was, what that added up to was that we had in direct contact with the patients, uninhibited direct contact, which allowed us to receive almost an unprecedented data value, a database from these patients regarding the preference, if it's either buds or oils or the certain strain or the strain fitting the certain age. And the way we see it, even if you can typify Israel beside the research, is the fact that we have really an unusual or unprecedented database because of this unique structure, the unique combination of being maybe the first in worldwide in regulating medical cannabis, and the fact that we acted as one-stop shops for many years, having the entire chain value. And for example, just we use that data in different spheres, not only for research, but also we developed a line of dermocosmetic products containing CBD based on our data that was that we acquired through the administering the ointment to patients for years, and we developed a line of dermocosmetic products and even cosmetic products based on that data. Now, I'd like to even already now to point out maybe a major issue that I guess is relevant to everybody who's involved in the cannabis industry. There is a lot of uncertainty regarding what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, how the broadening of the regulation of the recreational market is going to affect the medical cannabis. There are a lot of uncertainties, and in Israel there were some additional uncertainties because up till a few months ago there was no export regulation, and so we had to function and we had to build up a strategy under really a general uncertainty. And what we did, beside the obvious of refining our cultivation manners and focusing a lot on tissue culture, and in fact we were able to have full flowering and lab setup, which we're very proud of, and we think it's innovative, and obviously taking part in clinical research, in the process of clinical research for dermatological products and treating with atopic dermatitis and etc. We also tried to look into sort of new ventures, and one of them, and I think it's a very interesting example, is that we're entering into a research with a research facility that owns a license for hallucinating mushrooms, and which have ingredients that affect the nervous system. And we are going to in this research, among others, we're going to look into the synergy between cannabis ingredients and mushroom ingredients. And again, out of the understanding that you have to look for new horizons because of the uncertainty regarding the medical cannabis market and the uncertainty regarding the effect of the recreational on the medical market. At the same time, we're also involved, and we're gonna start producing and marketing our products in Australia and in East Asia with a partner, with a publicly traded company in Australia that has a medical cannabis license. So we have to be aware of the commercial aspects all the time. We have to look into new ventures at the same time, and it's an interesting period. And if you add even the COVID elements, but that's in a nutshell, sort of PharmoCann and sort of a way of looking ahead in the cannabis market.
Thank you. That's definitely, I think that sheds a lot of light. So, I mean, but I guess this raises the question, you know, when we already saw a couple of questions about that from the audience, but Alex, maybe, you know, when dealing with this industry, it sort of takes one back to the days in the army when everything is sort of with acronyms. I mean, maybe you can shed some light. I mean, we hear a lot, you know, CBD, THC. I mean, can you sort of shed some light on the difference between those components and what really are the healing elements and properties of cannabis?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. And by the way, that was really wonderful summaries by both the panelists. PharmoCann has consistently been at the leading edge for a long time. And when I was last in Israel, which is now too long ago, they were blazing new trails then, and they're certainly doing it now. The challenge with the acronyms is that we get stuck on them. So an important distinction, which was made decades ago now by the great Dr. Gillerman, he deserves credit. He's really the grandfather of cannabinoid chemistry. Without him, we wouldn't have what we have today. The distinction that has been made is that the plant contains this wide range. Sometimes it's named to be in 100 or more of these active ingredients. But the ingredients, the smaller components of the plant, if you want to think of it that way, they do very different things. So we refer to them as the major ones, which would be the ones that we've talked about so far, the CBD, which has a different regulatory status in the United States and most places in the world, because it's not psychoactive. It doesn't get you as stoned or stoned at all as the THC, which is the principal one that is used for psychoactivity, but not necessarily for other things like inflammation or pain. The CBD seems to work very well. So these have been identified, and there's just a few of them that we call the major cannabinoids, so CBD and THC. And then there's many more that we call the minor ones. And there's an argument that's been made, most persuasively by someone that PharmoCann knows very well, Dr. Russo, Ethan Russo, another pioneer in this field, that you need a broader spectrum of these. If you isolate it down to just THC or just CBD, it probably doesn't work nearly as well. And this research that was originally done in Europe and has been replicated in Israel and to a lesser extent in the United States shows that if you have a broader spectrum of the product with some CBD, some THC, and some of these other minor ones that the acronyms we don't even really use much, that the product's more effective and potentially can cause less side effects, that the doses work over a broader range of people and you don't have to be as precise. So the simple way to think about it is CBD doesn't get you stoned, is good for certain things. THC does get you stoned, is good for other things. And the ideal ratio, if we forget about all the, I'm going to say, stupid laws that we have mostly in the United States, the ideal is that you have ratios of these things, which again is where PharmoCann excels because they have these decades of data. So the ratio of THC to CBD, if we keep it just to those two, is very important. A good example is if someone has cancer and they have pain from the cancer, secondary pain, which can be actually harder to treat and in some ways more a detriment to the quality of life of the person. We've all experienced people in our lives that have had cancer and you know what that pain can be like. You want a ratio of the THC to CBD that will help with their cancer pain, for example. But if it's the nausea being caused by radiation or chemotherapy, you want a different ratio of the THC to the CBD. And that's where these formulas that PharmoCann and these other companies that are operating more on a pharmaceutical level, that's where their real value lies, is they know how to adjust these ratios of the major and the minor cannabinoids. A long answer, but I hope that helps.
Definitely very informative, and actually we also got some input also from Kellen O'Keefe, basically, that very similarly it was just identifying that the cannabinoid actually has, hundreds of different components, which essentially makes it just a very complex plant, and it's really all these different components basically that make the research so complex. So thank you very much, Kellen. So I guess, Kellen, from your perspective, really, I mean, this complexity, I mean, how does that sort of, I mean, do you want to sort of expand on what you put over here into the chat?
Well, sure, but I really think Alex was doing a phenomenal job explaining it, and I think we were saying essentially the same thing, right? I was actually hoping that the panelists from Israel were going to tell me things today that I, as far as new discoveries in these areas that I was unaware of, right? The reality is that we've known about the value of full spectrum products and the entourage effect for quite some time. As far as I'm, that's about where my knowledge or the limitations of my knowledge are with regards to the science and exactly what's happening with what medical benefits and what healing properties and what cannabinoids. But in general, even as a cannabis connoisseur and looking at the adult use market and recreational cannabis, there are significant trends towards full spectrum or whole plant products, right? That capture the entire profile of the plant. Those are the most valuable extracts. Those are the most valuable vape pens on the market. So I think there's significant trends from users of all types that the plant is best in its full spectrum format. So I believe that you're seeing a number of different delivery methods from all the way from tinctures to concentrates to vape pens, all trying to utilize those processes.
So, thank you. So Dan, you talked before about one of the benefits that you see in your research basically is this comprehensive database that you've developed over the years that's helped you really understand a lot of the impacts and a lot of the different ratios that Alex was talking about of the different components of the cannabis. Is there, is this something that is, are these databases proprietary? I mean, is there sort of like public access to these kind of databases, or are they sort of peer reviewed, or is it basically it's really just purely proprietary, and that's really where the added advantages of the different companies that are involved in this research?
Proprietary. It's private property of the companies. That's what it gives companies such as PharmoCann an added value. There is also obviously shared info, but this is the propriety of PharmoCann, just like the other companies.
So there aren't a sort of peer-reviewed type of centrally located databases of this kind of information.
There are independent research, but the ones that based on your patients, that's proprietary as of today.
Okay. And Kellen, have you seen what's the impact of COVID-19 that you've seen in the United States on the industry?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So I'll try to maybe focus that specifically to the impacts of COVID-19 on the cannabis industry. It's been actually quite positive in many regards for American cannabis. One of the first things that happened that was very important was cannabis was deemed an essential business. So we went from, just short time ago, being looked at as something that was, again, still illegal and attached to stigmas, to, again, now being deemed an essential business in the midst of a pandemic. So for that, I am incredibly grateful as a silver lining to this situation, and believe that has resulted in a continuing improvement of removing the stigmas associated with cannabis and helping cannabis become more mainstream in America. So I believe that has been a positive impact. In addition to that, we've seen cannabis usage across the board is up. Even in states where we've seen more restricted use to access to the product, we've still seen that usage across the board, when tracked and how tracked, appears to be up. And whether it be because of people having more time on their hands at home, whether it be because of the cannabis's ability to ease nerves and anxiety, which of course are at an all-time high. I believe there's a number of reasons for it. I also believe that it's a very, very, very much safer alternative to alcohol. And we've seen, of course, during this pandemic that alcohol use can be alarming and rising at alarming rates. So I believe that there's a continued movement towards substituting cannabis for alcohol, and that continues to grow across the country. So, cannabis has been deemed an essential business. We are on the verge of potentially the end of prohibition, whether it be through the MORE Act, the SAFE Act, or some form of states' rights. We're very, very excited that soon cannabis will be, at the very least, no longer federally illegal. And therefore, it will allow for the research that so many of our guests and so many of our, I'm sure, people watching here today, I can sense when there's American doctors and there's people that are looking for very specific information. They're looking for the research so that they can get the confidence they need to recommend these products to their patients. And that just doesn't exist in America, unfortunately. And a lot of the limitations still revolve around cannabis being federally illegal. So that's why it's so important that we continue to get, I feel like we've made a tremendous amount of progress over the last few years, but we are on the goal line, if you will, of federal legalization. And I'm hoping that over the next year or two, we will see some significant progress that will allow the industry to continue to evolve in a more sustainable manner. And of course, medical cannabis and research will of course then be allowed to take place and exist in a way that it does not today.
So Alex, I guess interestingly enough, I think, one of the quote unquote benefits of COVID really is sort of being that it's definitely raised a lot of awareness with the general public to the regulatory requirements of medical approval processes. Do you think that this sort of market awareness will help sort of create pressure that will have a positive, negative impact on the testing requirements of cannabis-related medications?
It's fascinating, and it's a very good question. The application of both the major cannabinoids that we just mentioned, THC, CBD, and some of the terpenes and the minor ones, which we didn't mention the initials of. We don't want to overwhelm ourselves with acronyms. The potential application of them for respiratory illnesses in general has actually been looked at. It's a fascinating study. Interestingly enough, it came out of Iran several years ago on a respiratory virus that's common in children. It's a really interesting study, and there's been follow-up work on that now internationally. The antiviral properties or antibacterial properties has been studied less than the positive, let's say, side effect amelioration or side effect reduction from COVID. But they also suspect now that and again, some of this work's coming out of Israel, they also suspect that there are, let's just say, antiviral properties in the broader spectrum of cannabinoids. It is a challenge to study some of that in the United States, not just because the cannabinoids are heavily regulated, the psychoactive ones, has been mentioned by the other panelists, but also because it's hard to do actual research with the virus itself, very limited to the institutions that can do that because the virus is considered a real biohazard. So your laboratory has to be prepared for that. So they use proxy viruses that are not as toxic if they escape from the lab, for example, or some technician gets infected. But in the early work that's going on right now in the United States, they believe using these proxy viruses that the cannabinoids are going to have a dramatic effect. What I would caution, though, is both from a regulatory point of view and sort of a clinical point of view, you don't want to come out and make a claim that using any form of hemp, marijuana, any minor or major cannabinoids or terpenes is going to have an effect directly on the virus. That's premature, and that should be cautioned against. Also, if you do that in the US, the FDA would be extremely upset about it, and I feel justifiably. That said, it can't hurt. Like from a clinician's point of view, if you have someone who's been severely affected by something and you have only a limited number of options in front of you, and those options are not very attractive, ironically, people self-medicating anyway with cannabis or hemp, which we see in vulnerable populations. We see this a lot in minority populations, and we see it a lot in, let's say, veterans and other people with other comorbidities. The anecdotal reports are that it's helpful. We're not quite sure why. So I would say, don't make a claim, and don't say you heard it from me, but I certainly would say the risk-benefit leads towards trying it in a clinical context with the obvious involvement of your physician or group of physicians. Don't self-medicate blindly by saying, I'm going to smoke this extract or eat these gummies, but really involve your physician in that conversation. You'd be surprised how open they'll be to it, because quite frankly, they don't have a lot of options at this point. That's the sad part about the virus.
So Danny, from your perspective, I mean, for an Israeli company that's got extensive research and know-how at this point, I mean, the problem with in general in the medical industry, and I imagine especially also with the cannabinoid industry, is that indeed you have to sort of overcome a lot of obstacles just to be able to deliver the products, to market the product outside the borders of Israel. How do you do that? I mean, how do you overcome those kind of obstacles?
Well, may I refer to the COVID issue in Israel? I think that there's some interesting data, and then I'd refer to the expert. Look, I just looked into the data released by the Israeli Health Ministry, and it turns out that in Israel, the crisis started about February 20, and then the closure started. And since then, there was a rise of about 10% in the licenses that were registered to patients in Israel. Now there are about 68,000, almost 69,000 registered patients that have license. And in that period, and it rose from about 60,000. So about 10% more patients received license in the pandemic period. More than that, if you look at the accumulated amounts of, according to the license, in average, a patient in Israel has a license for between 35 and 38 grams per month. And if you look at it, it's rise to about 10% also the accumulative amount, which means that the pandemic hasn't affected the consumption of medical cannabis, and it even increased in that period. That's in a general manner. And if anyone is interested, by the way, if you look at the breakdown, let's say for the last year, about 53% of the licenses were for chronic pain, 10% oncology, and about 8% chemotherapy. But there wasn't a breakdown in that respect in the pandemic. But if you can see, it's consistent that there are more licenses and there's more usage during the pandemic. And by the way, we see it also in PharmoCann. We see two things. First of all, that it remained the same, and we even had to produce more. But one of the things that probably typifies it, that there was a shift to more higher THC strains during the pandemic. That's what we call THC 20. And there's another interesting, I don't know if it's a trend, but it's a path, is that in general, about a year or 2 years ago, the expectation was that more and more people will use oils instead of buds and flowers because of the resentment of smoking, etc. And it turns out that even today, more than 80% still prefer buds than oils. the patients, because it's in many aspects it's probably more effective even as of today using buds, using smoking than using oils. That is regarding sort of the specific effects of the pandemic in Israel on medical cannabis. Regarding the export, I don't know if you know, but up till a few months ago, you were not allowed at all to export from Israel. And that raised a huge state of uncertainty, because obviously it was our interest to export our knowledge and our strains and our products to Europe and the States and Far East and et cetera. But 3 months ago, there was a decree that basically allows export of products, including topicals and including and oils. And this is yet to be formalized and detailed. But the expectation is that in the coming months, we'll have a more detailed regulation and we'll be able to start exporting from Israel in a matter of months, because the basic decree has been already enacted.
Interesting. So, what about there's a question over here about the anti-inflammatory effect of it. Does anybody have any information about that, the benefits of it?
Yeah, I can talk to that briefly.
Sure.
So I always like to use the example of my dog. So I've got a dog and he's aging, and he just doesn't like to get up as much as he used to. So he has pain in his hip, a common condition in aging dogs. Surprisingly, they're really responsive. We don't know if humans are quite as responsive as dogs, but dogs are incredibly responsive. And if you give them a small amount, again, the fuller the spectrum, the better. My dog always has the munchies, so I can't tell whether he's got extra appetite because I'm giving him something that has a little THC in it. But the broader the spectrum, the more of the major cannabinoids, not just CBD, not a CBD isolate by itself, meaning like a white powder that they mix into the dog biscuit, but actually something that's really more, let's just say, coming from the plant. The broader the spectrum, the more effective it is. And the research shows this in dogs, not just anecdotally with my dog. The anti-inflammatory, the ability to shut down inflammation, which we normally think of as, say, I've got hip pain or knee pain or ankle pain. Inflammation is like a systemic thing. You can have inflammation in your brain. You can have inflammation in all sorts of other organs and tissues. So the ability to affect systemically inflammatory response actually might be one of the reasons why you look at it for a virus like COVID, because you get this overreactive immune response, this storm that causes a lot of problems, a lot of secondary problems. So it's a very important activity. And the interesting thing about it is anti-inflammatories is another area where conventional medicine, let's call it allopathic Western medicine, doesn't have a lot of tools. If you've got severe inflammation systemically or locally in your hip and systemically in multiple organs, really, we've only got a couple of arrows in the quiver, and one of them would be steroids, and they work miraculously, but they only work for a short period of time, because if you keep giving them to people, you end up with severe problems, as many people that know, that have tried them. So I would say it's one of the silver bullets that the cannabinoids promise society, and that's inflammation. The other fascinating thing about it is when we look at the traditional use of cannabinoids, and again, I mentioned Dr. Russo in the context of the full spectrum stuff and the terpenes, Ethan Russo, who has his own company now, but was at GW Pharma with Dr. Gillerman for many, many years, over a decade. One of the things that he's contributed to is they found a cave, or a burial site more accurately, in China. And the preservation of the little satchel medicine that this ancient practitioner or person had on them was incredibly well preserved. I like to say the good quality concentrate that he had, the vape pen he had in his little bag, to be sarcastic, was remarkably well preserved, and they could characterize what it was accurately. I don't remember the carbon dating, but it was 1,000 years old or something. And what we know from that is that the ratio of cannabinoids that existed in that ancient sort of medicine bag that this person carried on them probably had pretty profound anti-inflammatory effects. The other thing is, if you talk to an elite athlete today in impact sports like rugby or football, soccer, etc., where they get a lot of abuse, and the mixed martial artists in particular, the striking force people that are basically beat up all the time for a living, they're constantly using cannabinoids to control the inflammation. And that's a big testament that placebos don't work very well on people who get their heads hit 20 times a day. It's really one of the areas where you really see effectiveness, or you don't. So I'll leave it at that, but happy to answer more questions on that offline.
So final question, Kellen. I mean, what I hear, sort of, if I sort of summarize some of the, is that a lot of this, that in Israel, the research is actually has really progressed because essentially it's sanctioned, it's allowed by the government, and we heard how Dan how he was describing that over the years, basically the company has sort of managed to develop a great database based on experimentation and research that is being that is very helpful in developing new products. We heard from Alex how essentially, I guess a lot of it is sort of like a self, I mean, to a certain level, because of the lack of centralized sort of government research, a lot of this is very sort of anecdotal information that we hear that Alex was describing. I guess from your company's perspective, aren't you concerned that people might resort to sort of, to this sort of like self-medication of taking the items that you distribute and using that for sort of self-medication purposes?
And to answer your question in short, no, I am not concerned, because I believe that the alternatives are far more dangerous. Having personally lost many people to accidental pharmaceutical overdoses and other addictions, and watched those develop, and watched the side effects and symptoms of these much harsher, very, very normalized pharmaceutical drugs, I believe that cannabis presents a much safer alternative. And so I've seen enough anecdotally and personally, and continue to hear enough stories on a day-to-day basis, that I feel that, again, that the safer alternative is cannabis. To that point, the point you're making is not missed. I believe that is very much why I was very much championing before for legalization, and to bring real research to cannabis, so that we can have answers to these questions and provide doctors, patients, myself, again, as one of the self-volunteered guinea pigs. I would like this information myself, knowing that I consume those products personally. I do believe to see their benefits, but I think, Alex made a very, very strong point earlier about, the concentration of any plant and its pharmaceutical impact. And that is something that I believe needs to be studied in cannabis, and I'll be very much watching the results of closely. And then companies like mine will be able to work with companies like Dan's and others from around the world that have done this research, have produced the formulations, and will want to bring their products to market in the United States. So they'll come to companies like Flower One that have GMP, ISO, certified type, the best in class facilities and production methods, and likely partner to bring those products to life through some sort of licensing or joint venture agreement, rather than choosing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to develop their own facilities. So you know, I'm very anxious for all of these worlds to come together, for more research to exist, and for everybody to get the answers they're looking for. But in the short term, I'm very comfortable with the risk because I believe in the product, and again, I use it myself.
So final 30-second round for each one as we wrap up. What's your prediction for 2021? Dan?
It's hard to say. We will see, as I said before, we will see some effect. What will be the effect of broadening of the recreational market on the medical cannabis market? Another thing that I expect, and that's a bit sideshow, is that the CBD will be, they will change the UN convention in order to allow CBD to be used as in cosmetics around the world. I see it's a matter of months or not more than a year that there will be a dramatic change in the perspective of CBD by itself in wellness products.
Thanks. Kellen?
Sure, I'll try to focus more on my area of expertise, which is American cannabis. You know, I'm not certain that we will see the end of prohibition or full legalization, but I'm very optimistic that by the end of 2021, we will see some form of states' rights or at least safe banking. I think that we will also see, before even the end of this year, several additional states transition to adult use markets. These are going to be states with massive populations. I believe we're going to see states in 2021, we're going to see states potentially like New York and Florida, New Jersey, several others on the East Coast that will probably transition to full adult use markets. And then if not, they'll certainly adopt medical markets. So I believe that the United States will continue to make significant progress towards the end of prohibition. I also believe that the industry will continue to evolve. We've seen cannabis transition from a 1.0 to 2.0 to, you know, we've seen, you know, legacy cannabis entrepreneurs. Now we're seeing a series of large-scale agriculture, you know, big major greenhouse design, build, and operations. We're seeing state-of-the-art production facilities. We're seeing medical research come together with product formulation, you know, formulators and brands to develop products at a much higher standard, or to a much higher standard than we've seen before. So I'm very excited for cannabis and what the next year means. Hopefully, once we get past these elections, you know, or as we get through these elections, I should say, cannabis will continue to provide the relief and hopefully keep everybody calm.
Alex, final word to you.
Well, I would say what's significant now that was not 6 months ago, really, is that science has changed. And the way it's changed for the benefit of all humanity is that research is being done at an absolutely accelerated pace like we've never experienced before, not certainly in my lifetime. And I think that is going to benefit cannabis research a great deal. It already is, and it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. So you'll start to see really good quality of research, which the industry has been in the US, sadly, more focused, and in Canada, more focused on profit than on research. We've seen that in how little money has been contributed to the institutions that do that work, and how little research the companies themselves have done. It's really been sad. I believe that will change for the reasons that were just mentioned by the other panelists in the United States. And you'll find tremendous amount of new research being done that will prove the efficacy of the product. The second thing that I think is going to happen is that the issue of safety is going to be front and center. So sadly, you know, we have, if we wanted to rank them in order, we have Canada with some of the most strictest controls on contaminated product. whether it's intentional or not. As I mentioned, the product tends to contaminate itself by doing its job of taking poisons out of the environment. And then, of course, we spray extra poisons on it to make it, not susceptible to disease. It is an agricultural crop, for example. So Canada is by far the most stringent. I would say actually worldwide. Israel does an excellent job. Within the United States, California has led in this area, and I believe it will continue to lead. Then some of the other states have varying degrees of quality control. What I think you'll see is that everyone will try and move up to a higher level, because if they don't, they are not delivering a safe product. And if you don't deliver a safe product, at the end of the day, consumers will reject it, or there'll be lawsuits. So those are the two big trends I see in this year. More research coming because of the acceleration of science, and now money going into science, unfortunately not coming from the companies, the publicly traded companies themselves, the small companies anyway. And the second is a higher level of safety. I like to say, think about automobiles. 30 years ago, there was state-by-state laws, worldwide chaos about whether an automobile could pollute or not. Pretty much all automobiles in the United States and North America, and to a large extent worldwide, adhere to the California environmental standards. They were forced to, not because the automotive industry wanted to be safer, but because people demanded that there be less pollution. And that's going to continue, I think, across the cannabis industry, and that's a good thing. We should all just simply adopt a uniform standard of safety and stop trying to make money in these little arbitrage opportunities. And
Thank
give
you.
to research. Everyone should donate to research. That's my advice.
Thank you. But I think Barry Gordon actually summarized it very nicely, that it's all about the safe, legal, and regulated, educated use of all substances, including cannabis. But I think, as you said, Alex, I think the awareness that COVID has raised basically to medical research, and the ability basically to expedite research that we've seen over the last 6 months, I think hopefully will help the industry also tremendously. Thank you very much. This has really been very, very educational and illuminating, basically. And I know that I've learned a lot, and hopefully also the audience. As I said, this is really just one out of our series. Please do track us on our website to be able to see what our future webinars are. We are also, just as an aside, while all these webinars activities are being provided really at no cost, no charge, we are right now in the middle of a campaign. We have a generous donor who basically has promised to match dollar for dollar for any donation that we give that we receive over the next few weeks. So if you can, we would really appreciate very much if you can log into our website and go and make help us defray some of the cost associated with these webinars. Coming up next on Wednesday, we have a briefing from the IDF spokesman that will update us, let us know what's happening in Israel on the security. And we'll continue with the webinar series throughout the holidays, with another one of our operas, as well as also with songs for the new year. Once again, Shana Tova to everybody. We hope we really going back to Dan Gillerman's wish. We all wish for all of us to have a year of normalcy. I think we all deserve it at this point. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Sure.